welcome to the OklaRoots YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we are going to be going over a Sojo boosting pattern. Today, we are making the Jackie pouch purse, and this comes to us from Kandou patterns. Okay, so I'm gonna be totally honest with you over here. It's been cold in Northeast Florida for more than a few days, okay? And I know most likely where you are, it is colder, okay? I get that. But for Florida, it's been cold. And when it's cold, I lose my energy. And when I lose my energy, I lose my sojo, my oomph to get in the sewing room and sew something. And my sewing is like sportsing to me. It's what makes me happy. And if I don't do it for a while, then I get even sadder and we have an onion of layers of sadness. And so what I do to break out of that sadness ball is to do a quick, easy, simple, fun pouch pattern. And today's Jackie pouch purse does not disappoint. It is amazing. It is so cute. So let's go over the bag real quick and then we're gonna talk about what we're gonna do today. So first, this is the medium size. There are 3 sizes, multiple options here. This is the medium size. This little flap here is optional. You don't have to do it. It is an option though, and it has a little snap on it. Underneath the flap, you have like a little secret zipper. How cute is that? So you have a little zip pocket on the front. On the back, we just have a main panel. And then we open it up on the top with our main zipper. Ba-bam! Look inside and we have card slots. Card slot pockets are completely optional. Then on the side, I would say this is optional as well. If you just don't use wristlets, then it can be just a pouch. But on the side here, we have a little D-ring and a little wristlet strap. So this pattern can be made one size smaller or one size larger. You could also add another little D-ring strap over here and make it a crossbody. In today's tutorial, we are leaving off the optional pieces except for the wristlet strap. We are not going to do the flap and we're not going to do the card slot pocket. And the reason for that is because today is all about zapping you out of that sewing rut where you want to make something, but you just don't want to make that many pockets, and card slots take a while, and the flap, I don't know if I'm going to get the angles right. All the excuses we come up with to not sew something when we really want to sew something, we're gonna push all that stuff away so we don't have them. Today, we're gonna just do the bare minimum. We're gonna make the small size and it's going to turn out adorable. I just know it. But if you are interested in all the extras, do not worry. We're gonna do a separate video over the same pattern where we're gonna make the large size with all the extras, and we're gonna make it a crossbody. So thank you so much, as always, to Kandou Patterns for allowing me to use your patterns on my channel. If you've been around for a while, you know I am a huge Kandou Patterns fan. We're gonna go through all of them. We're gonna go through all of them. At some point, we're gonna catch up and we're gonna have a tutorial for every single one of them. So if you haven't checked them out, I will have a link for their Etsy shop down below. They have the most chic, modern, simple, clean lines, but really, really unique bags out there. This pouch is just like that. I mean, it's a pouch, but it's not just a pouch. You know what I mean? If you're new to the OklaRoots YouTube channel, please consider clicking subscribe down below. If at any point you like this video, please give it a like. Any questions, comments, shoutouts, anything at all, leave them down in the comment section. I will have timestamps for every single step of this tutorial. You'll have them listed on the bottom of the screen right over here. You can also click the little arrow over here and expand that description. That's where they're gonna be listed there as well. There will also be links for all of the products I'm using down in that description. All right, guys, let's get started. Okay, so as you can see in this first pouch, I used quill cotton for the entire thing. I used quill cotton for the exterior, quill cotton for the lining, quill cotton for everything. And it turns out beautifully. So you can definitely just use quill cotton today and you're gonna be perfect. Just make sure you follow the interfacing instructions. You're pretty much gonna add a woven interfacing to the exterior material. There's no interfacing added to the lining material, which makes the seams a lot easier to sew, and then you're gonna have like a craft fuse for the card slots. Like I said, we're gonna go over a whole bigger sized one, and I think when we do the bigger size, we're gonna use quill cotton and Decoville Light. We're gonna play with it a little bit more. But in today's tutorial, we're gonna make the small size, and I'm gonna be using material that does not require any interfacing. So for the exterior, I'm using 2 types of vinyl. I have this a little bit heavier, thicker weight vinyl for the body of the bag, and then I have this thinner weight vinyl for the top of the bag. Now, I prefer to use a thinner weight vinyl for the top of the bag because that's where the zipper is. However, we will still be installing a zipper on here in a very unique way, so I'm interested to see how that turns out. For the lining, I am using waterproof canvas. Waterproof canvas does not require any interfacing, and I think with the combination of this bag is going to be very structured. I'm interested to see if it's gonna be too structured for the small size, but we're gonna work through that together today. So for the small size, you need about a fat eighth of the main fabric, a fat eighth of the contrast fabric, If you're using interfacing, 1/2 yard is what you'll need. For the lining, you'll need a fat quarter. Very, very scrap friendly project. Super scrap friendly. Okay, so here's all the hardware for today. You're gonna have 2 zippers. You're gonna have a 5-inch and 7-inch zipper. If you're using zipper tape, we want them to be longer. Okay, so I would suggest just make sure you have about 1 yard of zipper tape. Don't cut it yet. We're gonna cut it even longer than the pattern suggests. You're also gonna need a 1/2-inch D-ring and a 1/2-inch swivel hook. This is just if you're adding a wristlet strap. If you're not, then you can just skip that. And then we have 2 zippers, one for the top and then one for that little feature on the front. So I have 2 zipper pulls for that. Okay, here's all the other stuff today. For the top thread, I have a Tex 35 weight thread, and then for the bobbin thread, I just have this Gutermann polyester thread. Any thread's gonna work here. If you're using vinyl and things like that, a thicker thread looks a little bit nicer and it's a little bit tougher to go with those, you know, tough seams of the vinyl. If you're using quill cotton, any thread really that you prefer to sew with is gonna work great. And then my needle today is a Microtex 8012. Again, because I'm using vinyl, that's why I'm using a bit of a heavier needle. If you're just using quill cotton, you can get away with a smaller needle. For marking on the material, I always like to have an air erasing marker, a vinyl marker, and a chalk marker. I always have a stiletto on hand next to the sewing machine. And then I have this turning tool here that really helps poke out those corners if you need it. I always have a lighter in the sewing room as well. This is to burn any little threads, and I'll show you if I use it. I'll show you what we use that for. My Kai scissors and my snips. Of course, I have my bag tag, and then I have these little sew-in tags for the lining, which I've been having so much fun with. I will be using a rivet today. You do not need to use any rivets, but I will be using a rivet on the wristlet strap, and so to go with my rivet, I have my rivet press, and then as always, a 1-inch by 6-inch ruler for everything. Also, some bag making standards, double-sided tape. This is going to be really helpful with the zipper, and a healthy supply of clover clips. Next up, let's go through the pattern pieces. Pattern piece A is your main body. This is like the majority of the front and the back and the bottom. I'll be using vinyl for this, so I have 2 cuts of vinyl. No interfacing, like I said, but if you're using quill cotton, you will want to interface that with your woven interfacing. And then for the top accent piece, that's pattern piece B. Again, 2 pieces of vinyl. If you were doing a flap, that would be pattern piece C. Just make sure you get the flap size for the size you're working on. Remember, there's 3 different sizes today, so follow the measurements for the small size, if that's what you're working on. All right, here are the rest of the pieces we'll be working with. We have pattern piece D, which is the zipper pocket facing. This is gonna make it easier to install the pocket on the front of the bag. And then we have the pattern piece E, which is that pocket lining. This is the pocket lining for the zip pocket on the exterior of the bag. Pattern piece F is what we'll be using for the zipper end and D-ring. I'll actually be cutting out 2 of these today because I will have 2 zipper ends, one for the beginning and one for the end, instead of just one like the pattern calls for. Pattern piece G is for your card slot pockets. I'm not making those today, so I'm not using it. Pattern piece H is also gonna go for the sides of the card slot pocket. Again, since I'm not doing that panel, I don't need these pieces today. Pattern piece I is the main lining panel. Since I'm skipping the card slot pockets, I cut 2 of these out for today. And pattern piece J is your wristlet strap. Okay, first things first, let's make the main back panel. So you're gonna grab one of your pattern piece A's and a pattern piece B. And pattern piece B goes on the top, so if you have a directional print, just make sure you have it all lined up correctly. And lay your pattern piece B right sides down against the top edge of the A piece. Grab those clips and just clip these together, right sides together. And now let's sew along this edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you have those sewn together, you're gonna press that top panel up, and so the seam is behind the top panel. So if you're using quill cotton, go ahead and grab an iron and press this with an iron. Otherwise, you can finger press it if you're using vinyl like me. And now we're gonna top stitch along the zipper panel at an 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. You can do a second row of top stitching a 1/4 inch above that if you would like that more professional look. So now you're gonna grab pattern piece D. And I'll be honest, the only pattern piece I printed off from the pattern was the flap. So everything else is rectangles. You don't have to print off all those pattern pieces. But if you didn't print off the pattern piece for this, you're gonna have to use a ruler to mark out all of your lines on the back of this. So make sure you check the pattern and mark out the little rectangle that goes on the back of this pattern piece. And it does depend on which size you're making, so pay very close attention to the size that you're working with and the measurements for that size. So once you have that marked on the back of your facing, grab your front main piece and make sure you mark the top midpoint mark. So I'm just going to fold it in half, and I find folding it is usually just the most accurate way to really get that midpoint mark. I'm going to use scissors here to just kind of clip into it. There we go. Okay, and then make sure you also mark the midpoint on the top of your facing piece. And so we're gonna lay our facing unit right side down and we're gonna match up the midpoint marks. And that rectangle you drew on the top edge of your facing should be on the top edge here with your exterior piece. So line up the midpoint first, add a clip there, and then clip out towards the sides. Okay, now we're gonna take this to the sewing machine and we're gonna sew along that rectangle that you marked. And so it's just right here. We're gonna sew right along the short edges, the long edge, and up the other short edge. Make sure you leave your needle in at the corners. So needle needs to be down right in that corner, and then you pivot and then you continue sewing. So once you have that stitch down, you're gonna trim on the inside of that box 1/4 of an inch away from your stitches. So you can just eyeball this. You could also grab a ruler if you'd prefer, but definitely use hand scissors for this. I would not suggest a rotary cutter. So just trim 1/4 inch in. And then on these corners right here, you're gonna trim down towards the corner of your stitching, and you wanna get really close to it, but you don't wanna cut the thread. So get as close as you can without cutting the thread. Since I'm using a thicker material, I'm actually staying a little bit further away from it than I normally would, because I am worried that the vinyl is going to kind of rip and tear at those corners. So I'm trying to be careful with that. Okay, this is the part that's gonna be the trickiest if you're not using quilt cotton. If you're using quilt cotton, all you have to do is take this material, flip it to the back so it's wrong sides together, and then iron it to hold it down so you have this nice rectangular opening. However, since I'm using vinyl, ironing it's not going to do any good. So I am going to use some tape for this. So the first thing I'm going to do is fold it back wrong sides together, and I'm going to use clips to hold it in place until I can tape it. So I'm just rolling it back. And ideally, your facing will be the same material as your main material here. So that way, if a little bit is peeking over, you won't really notice the difference. However, I don't think vinyl would work well for the facing, at least not at my skill level. Okay, so as you can see, I have it all folded back and I have it clipped. And now I'm gonna grab some tape, and I'm gonna need some pretty sticky tape for this. So I'm gonna grab my 1/2 inch wide leather double-sided tape. This stuff is no joke. You don't really want to sew over this with a domestic machine, but it's definitely going to hold everything in place. So I'm going to just add a few pieces in areas I don't think I'll be sewing. So more along the raw edge of my facing, and not too close to this here because we will be sewing over this up here, but a little bit further down. Now, if you're using quilt cotton, this is not going to be a problem at all. All you have to do is press it with your iron and then you're good to go. See, I'm just cutting small sections and adding it to the edge. And it is super sticky, which means it's difficult to sew over, but I can still rip it up if I need to when I'm having to sew down the sides of the facing. I'll show you. I can still remove it. I just need it to stay in place while I sew on the zipper. All right, so now if I remove my clips, let's see how well that's gonna stay. Oh yeah, that looks great. That is great. That'll work out great for the zipper. So now set this to the side. So now you're gonna grab your zipper pocket lining E, and I suggest you keep your zipper tape the same width or longer than that pocket piece, and then we'll trim it down. Having it a little too short, especially with zipper tape, could put you in a difficult position where it comes up on the edge. So just to avoid that, I'm gonna keep my zipper tape the same width as the pocket. And now if you're using a flap, this zipper is most likely gonna get covered up. But if you're not using a flap, this zipper is kind of a more feature zipper. So I have this fun long dangly one here. I'm just gonna add that to my zipper tape. Okay, so with your zipper lining right side up, take your zipper, and with the zipper closed, it's gonna go towards the right. And we're gonna line it up with the top side. So both the zipper and the lining are right side up, and just line up your zipper on the top edge. And now we're gonna sew along this clipped edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once you have that sewn on, what you wanna do is you wanna flip your lining so it comes wrong sides together with the exterior. So the zipper comes up and the lining is pushed away from it, just like that. Now this is gonna be a little difficult for me to iron simply because I'm using waterproof canvas and I don't wanna touch the back of this. So that's where more tape is gonna come in handy. Now this time I'm just grabbing my wash away double-sided tape, which means I can sew over it and it will be fine. So I'm just gonna add that right along the edge where my zipper and my lining are, and it's within the stitching. So I'm not going past the stitching. It's okay if it overhangs the edge a little bit, that'll be fine. Then I'm gonna remove my paper. And then I'm gonna flip this back and press the lining wrong sides together and just give it as good of a press as I can. And now I don't need this tape to hold it forever, I just need to hold it for a little bit. Okay, so now we have our zipper attached to our lining pocket, and when we lay it zipper right side up, we should have the wrong side of the lining, and the zipper is going towards the left. And then we're gonna take our exterior unit and we're gonna lay it right over our zipper. So make sure you move your pull out of the way. It needs to line up with the top edge of your zipper tape, and it needs to be centered. This is where you're gonna pull it up on the side, and the sides of your lining should match up with the sides of your facing. So if you need to scooch it over one way or the other, go ahead and do that. You have a few things to keep an eye on here. So we're lining it up with the top edge of the zipper tape, and we're flipping it over to check that the facing and the lining are matched up with one another. Again, my zipper is longer than it needs to be, which is where I'm comfortable. There we go. And so I'm gonna pull my zipper all the way to the left and push it down. All right, looking good. So now we're gonna take this to the machine and top stitch around these short edges and the long edges, and we're just attaching the facing and the exterior to the zipper and the lining. And your zipper panel should be down below the exterior, just like this. Oh my goodness, isn't that adorable? Okay, so now take your unit and flip it so you're looking at the right side of the vinyl, the wrong side of the zipper, and you're gonna bring that zipper panel up so that it meets up with the top edge of your main panel, and just clip together. Okay, so you're clipping that together, but we're not sewing it yet. What we want to do now is we want to pull up the facing. So remember, I used that really sticky tape, so I'm just gonna pull it away from the tape. And what we want to do now is sew along the edges over here. And I'm okay sewing over the zipper teeth. I think a little extra layer of sewing over the zipper teeth is good. So I'm gonna clip down this side, and I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. So I'm just gonna pull this up, and remember, I taped my zipper facing on there, so I gotta pull it off, and the tape is stuck to my exterior, that's fine. I just don't wanna sew over the tape. And then I'm gonna clip along this left side over here. So now we're gonna sew along these two edges. You can sew at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, a 1/2 inch seam allowance, whatever you're comfortable with. We just wanna sew down these edges to close that pocket. Okay, there we go. So we have our sides pinned down. If you have your zipper tape overextending like I do, go ahead and trim that down now. We don't want that in the seams over here in the end. So you can go ahead and trim that down. If you're making the pocket flap, go ahead and do that now. So now we're gonna finish the front panel just like we did with the back panel. So grab your top strip here, and you're going to lay it right side down along the top edge where your zipper is, and just clip together, right sides together. So now we're gonna sew along this edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, so once you have that sewn in place, you're gonna flip that top panel up so that the seam goes behind the top panel. And once again, let's top stitch along that panel at an 1/8 inch seam allowance. And if you want, go ahead and do a second row of top stitching a 1/4 inch above that 1/8 inch seam allowance. Isn't that adorable? I love this little zipper right here. So now if you have a bag tag, now's a good time to add it. I like to add it kind of like right underneath the zipper. So when I do that, obviously I need to move this zipper panel out of the way, because if I stitch over that, then you can't really use it anymore, right? So I'm going to just kind of center it and mark it. Let's see, how far is this? It's about 1 1/4 inches down from the top edge of the panel here. So you can just eyeball this however you want to do it. What I like to do is grab a little piece of double-sided tape, just put that on the back of my tag. Okay, so now I have that centered in place, and once again, take that zipper pocket and pull it out of the way. We don't want to sew over it. And now I'm just going to top stitch along all 4 edges of my tag at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Alright, and when I do that, I like to leave the tails nice and long on the tag, and then I flip it to the back and I have the bobbin tails that are nice and long, and I can pull on each bobbin thread individually, and when I do that I get a little loop of the top thread, and I can pull that loop to the back. So now I can pull all 4 threads to the back of my material. So now I have 2 bobbin threads, and then I can just separate them and give them a triple knot, just triple knot them back here. And that just creates a really nice clean look on the top stitching on the front with no back stitching or anything like that. Total personal preference. All right, there's the front panel. It's looking adorable. So now you're going to grab a D-ring holder, which is 2 inches by 2 inches, and on the back you can mark a midpoint line, and then you're going to fold the raw edges to meet that midpoint line, and then fold the whole thing in half. Obviously I've been doing this for a while, and I'm not that picky about it, so I can kind of eyeball this, but if you want, you can get an iron, you can get a ruler to get it exactly right. Pretty much what we want is a 2 inch by 1/2 inch double folded piece of material, just like this. So now let's top stitch along both of the long edges of this little D-ring strap. So now you have your little D-ring strap. Grab your D-ring and just wrap the D-ring strap around the straight part of your D-ring. And we're gonna line this up with the 1/8 of an inch top stitching right here. So it's just gonna line up right on top of it, like that. There's really no precise, you don't have to be that precise here. You just don't want it too close to the top because we don't want to have to deal with this when we're sewing on the zipper. So now you can just go sew this on a 1/4 inch seam allowance. All right, your front panel is now done. So if you're doing the card slot pocket, you're gonna go ahead and build your card slot pockets now. However, since we're skipping that, we're moving on to the zipper. So talking about the main zipper, I'm gonna do mine a little bit different because I do like zipper tabs on the beginning and the end of my zipper. The pattern's gonna have the zipper tab on the end of the zipper, but the opening on the beginning side is going to remain open. You're gonna fold it back. I just like the tabs the best. So what we wanna do when we're cutting our main zipper is we want this zipper, when finished, to be 1.5 inches shorter than the top edge of our material. So what I do is just measure the top edge of my material, subtract 1.5 inches from that, and cut my zipper tape to that size. Because when I add my zipper tabs, it's really not going to change the length of my zipper. Okay, so I've cut my zipper tape down so it's 1.5 inches shorter, and now I'm going to grab my 2 zipper tabs, and I cut them a little messy, I know. But what I'm going to do is on the back side of my zipper tabs, I'm going to mark midpoint marks. Now each of these zipper tabs is 2 inches by 2 inches. So I'm just going to mark the midpoint on the back of each of these. And then I'm going to add some double-sided tape right along that midpoint mark. And if you're using quilt cotton for this, you don't need to add the tape. You can use an iron to do this, but with this material, it's just a little bit easier with the tape. And then again, I'm working on the back side of these. I'm going to remove the paper, and I'm going to fold up my raw edges, wrong sides together to meet those midpoint marks, and just stick them onto that tape. There we go. And then I can fold the whole thing in half again, and I'll use some clips to just hold it together like this. It's very similar to how we did the D-ring tab, except we're not going to stitch over the sides right now, at least not before we add it to the zipper. So do this for both of your tabs if you're choosing to do 2. Okay, now I'm going to grab my zipper, and I'm going to, this is like a little hot dog bun. See, 2 folded edges, 1 folded edge. I'm going to just insert my zipper right into the center of that hot dog bun. You should have overhang on both sides. And I'm going to do this for both sides. All right, now I'm going to go to the sewing machine, and I'm going to top stitch along the inner double folded edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance to attach these zipper tabs to the zipper. So once those are sewn on, now what I do is I just trim the edges of the zipper tab so it lines up with the edge of my zipper tape. So I just go right along the edge like that. And isn't that cute? I love that. That's so cute. Okay, so now we want to find the midpoint on the top edge of our front panel and also along both sides of our zipper. So with the zipper, we can just fold it in half grab your marking tool of choice and just mark right on the midpoint. And then same thing with the exterior panel. Just fold it in half and mark or clip, whatever is easiest for you. Now take your zipper, and with right side facing down, and when the zipper is closed, it's going towards the left, match up those midpoint marks. So the exterior and the zipper are right sides together. Your zipper should not extend all the way to the edges. There should be about 3/4 of an inch of the exterior showing on each side. Okay, now you can stitch 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, or you can baste it on at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, whichever is easiest for you. Well, it happens at some point in every video, but I forgot to turn the camera around for that one. I do apologize, but I just basted it down at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now we're gonna grab one of our lining panels and we're gonna lay it right side down, and we're going to clip it to that edge we just basted. Now this should be the same width as your exterior panel. Okay, and now we're gonna sew along this edge entirely at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Okay, so the pattern suggests you can trim down these corners at the top right here at a 45-degree angle. Just like that, to help reduce a little bit of bulk. And now the pattern suggests you pull all of this up, push the seam behind your top zipper panel here, and pull the lining away like this. And then top stitch along this top zipper edge right here at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. And you won't be including the lining in that. Now that is going to help construct the bag later. However, since I'm using this waterproof canvas, this is going to kind of, you see how it kind of rolls up and poofs up like that? So even if I top stitch it to the exterior, that's still gonna be rolled up like that. And I do worry it's gonna get caught in my zipper. So this is where I'm gonna diverge just a little bit again. So what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna pull this back. So the lining and the exterior are wrong sides together. And what I do is I clip along the edges so that it's all squared up. And if you need to, you can clip along the bottom as well to help hold it all in place. Okay, and I'm trying to get this top edge as straight as possible. If you're using quilt cotton, go ahead and iron this. Otherwise, if you're using vinyl or cork or something, just finger press it and get that zipper as straight as possible. And now what I'm gonna do, if you've made snack bags with me before, you know this, I'm going to stitch along this top zipper panel at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, but I'm not gonna go all the way to the ends. I'm only gonna go where my zipper is. So I'm gonna start right here where my zipper starts, and I'm gonna go down and I'm gonna finish where it ends. And what I'm gonna do for this is I'm gonna leave the tails really long, so I'm not gonna back stitch at the beginning and the end. I'm gonna start, I'm gonna leave the bobbin tail and the top tail really long, and I'm gonna do the same thing on the end, and then I'll tie them into knots on the back. So that's what I'm gonna do today, just purely because I know that my material will end up getting caught in the zipper otherwise. Alrighty, that's looking cute. So now I'm gonna flip this over so I'm looking at the right side of the lining, and I have one of my bobbin threads. I'm just gonna pull that up gently, and I can see my top thread looping through to the back, and I'm gonna use my stiletto to just pull on that loop. So now I have the top thread and the bobbin thread on the back here. I'm gonna do that on the other side as well, just so gently pulling on it because I don't wanna accidentally break any of my threads. And I also want to advise you, if you're pulling on this bobbin thread really hard and that top thread is not coming back at all and you end up breaking your bobbin thread, I just want you to know that's most likely happening because the top thread and the bobbin thread are knotted inside the seam from stitching, and that's okay. Because if you're pulling as hard as you can on it and that top thread won't move and it breaks, most likely you don't have to worry about anything. The top thread is fine. You can just trim the top thread and it's all knotted inside and it's okay. The point of all of this is to make sure that nothing comes undone as the bag is being used. So I'm just gonna triple knot each pair of threads. And I'm trying to make sure I knot it as close to the material as I can. And now I'm gonna grab some snips and I'm gonna trim close to the knot, but not like right at the knot. I have a teeny tiny bit, maybe like 1/8 of an inch or 1/4 of an inch of thread hanging off by the knot. There we go. And now this is where I grab my lighter. And what I do is I do my best to move the material out of the way so I can just look at those little itty bitty threads that are hanging off. And I'm oh so careful going to just boop, just just boop it. That's what you're gonna do. You're gonna boop it. You know when you boop something? You're just gonna boop it. You're not gonna get the flame right at the knot, because what you end up doing then is you burn the thread all around the knot, and then it's like, why did you even do that? Because now it's all burned away. So I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. I'm trying to just get those little tails to stick out, and then I boop them. Boop, all done. Just be careful with it. I've burned off plenty of knots. So that technique seems to work. All right, there we go. So now I have one side done. I'm just gonna repeat that with the back side. So I'm gonna grab my exterior back panel, and I'm gonna mark the midpoint on the top edge. And then I'm gonna lay my exterior back right side up, take my unit with the zipper and lay it zipper right side down, and then match up the midpoint marks. And now I'm gonna baste along this edge at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Once that's basted on, I'm gonna grab my remaining lining panel and lay my lining right sides down against the back of my zipper and line it up against that edge we just basted. And now I'm gonna sew along this edge at 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now once again, I'm gonna go ahead and just trim at a 45-degree angle. I'm not cutting the thread though, right? We're not cutting the thread, we're just trimming that down a little bit. And just like I did on the other side, I'm gonna flip my lining and my exterior wrong sides together. And remember, this is not what the pattern suggests. And by following the pattern, it's going to make completing the bag easier. This will make completing the bag a little bit more difficult, but I think trimming those corners is also gonna help. So I also like to clip along the bottom edge like this. If you have quilt cotton, you can press this with an iron. I'm gonna give it a good finger press, just like that. And I like to make sure my zipper is completely closed whenever I top stitch this second panel, or else you can end up getting kind of some wonky waves. So now I'm going to top stitch right along the edge where the zipper is only. So I'm not going edge to edge. I'm only starting at the zipper tab, going down to the end of the other zipper tab at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. Oh man, this is gonna be so cute. Okay, so just like we did on the front, let's flip it to the back, and I'm going to pull those top threads to the back with my bobbin threads, and then I'm just gonna triple knot them and then burn off the edges. Super gentle, right? You boop it with the lighter. Okay, the other change I'm gonna make from the pattern, I'm just changing it around a little bit because it's easier for me, is the boxing corners. The pattern's gonna have you cut all of the corners right now to box it later. I'm gonna wait until we sew it all together before I cut the corners, just because I'm a sloppy sewer, to be completely honest. I don't always keep everything together really neatly. And it's gonna drive me crazy if those corners don't match up perfectly. So I'm gonna just sew it all together first, and then I'm going to cut the corners. So we're gonna take the exteriors and lay them right sides together, and then take the linings and lay them right sides together. Make sure your zipper is halfway open. If you have a long zipper pull like I do, make sure they're in the middle so you don't end up sewing over them. And now starting with the exterior, we're gonna line them up right sides together. So I'm kind of just looking at where these two panels come together, and that's where I'm first concerned. Now I've got some bulk here because I'm using some thick vinyl, so that's going to be fun in my machine. But I start there, and then I go down to the corner. And then when I come up to the zipper part, since I trimmed down that corner, I think I can just fold it towards the exterior. Normally I don't trim those corners down, and what I like to do is I like to press open that seam. So the lining part goes to the lining side, the exterior part goes to the exterior side. You press that open, and that gives you a cleaner corner up there. You don't have that kind of butt bump. You know what I mean? Like the big bump that kind of looks like a butt. You don't have that. But since we trim those corners, I don't really think we need to do that. So on the other side, once again, I'm just looking at my top panel, my bottom panel, and I'm making sure that those line up in the same spot. And then I clip there. And then I'm going to deal with the zipper section. I'm just gonna let the seam go towards the exterior like it wants to. And then I'm going to match up these bottom corners here. And then I'll clip along the bottom edge to hold it all together. And now I'm doing the same thing on the lining. The lining's a little bit easier because you really don't have anything to match up, just the corners. So just grab those corners, match them up first. Unless you already cut out your corners, then just match up the corners of the corners. You know what I mean. and then go along the side. You might have to kind of twist it and pull it. I know that bump right here makes it hard to just lay it all flat. So remember, bags aren't flat. Bags aren't quilts. When we're constructing them, you should have to lift it up and kind of mush it around. All right, and then I'm gonna add a clip on the bottom as well. Now before you get started, make sure you mark a 5-inch gap on the bottom edge of your lining and make sure it's centered. You don't want it too close to one edge or the other, especially if you have not cut out your corners yet. Okay, so this is what I like to do. Starting at the bottom of the lining, I'm gonna sew at a 1/2 inch seam allowance till I get to this corner, pivot, and I'm gonna continue on at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. As I get closer to this zipper tab over here, I'm going to decrease my seam allowance to 3/8 of an inch. And when I come by this zipper over here, my goal is to sew as close to the tab as I can without sewing on top of it. Now, if you pinch right here and you have zipper tabs, you can pinch and you can feel, oh, there's the zipper tab. It's a lot thicker where that zipper tab is. You don't want to sew over that. You want to sew close to it. So what's going to help you is a zipper foot. A zipper foot's going to let you get really close to that zipper tab, but you're not going to sew that zipper tab. And then you're going to continue along the edge over here at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, along the bottom at a 3/8 inch, the other side, again, exterior, all 3/8 inch. Once we get past this zipper over here, I'm going to slowly start increasing my seam allowance to a 1/2 inch, pivot, continue at a 1/2 inch until I get to the other mark. At the beginning and the end, I do backstitch really well because we're going to be turning everything out through this hole right here. So you might have noticed that I did go a second time around the exterior, and that's just because I'm using a really thick vinyl. Anytime I'm using thicker vinyl, I do like to do a second row of stitching just to prevent the threads from showing in the end. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm actually going to box my corners. So make sure you refer to the pattern because every size has a different sized box corner. I am going to mark mine. Mine are 3/4 inch, and I just mark from the edge of the material, 3/4 inch. And you're gonna do this on the lining as well as the exterior. It's funny, on my lining, that gives me almost no boxing because I increased my seam allowance. That's okay. That is okay. I'll show you how we deal with that. So I'm gonna grab my scissors, and I'm just gonna cut my box corners. And remember, if you already did this before you sewed the panels together, then just skip what I'm saying right now. Okay, if you'd like to trim down any of the side seams or anything like that, you're more than welcome to do that. I'm gonna leave them. So now we're gonna box these corners. So I like to open the zipper all the way, and so what I can do is pull, and I can feel my zipper opening. So I just open the zipper all the way like that. And then what I try to do, it's hard to do with vinyl, but I try to pull towards the center of the material. If you try to just pull at the corners, a lot of times that's just gonna give you kind of a rounded boxed corner, and you really want that straight boxed corner. So maybe even insert your hand in through the opening in the lining to help. I know with my stiff vinyl, it's a little more work. And then you can rotate your seams in opposite directions. Again, if it's rounding, pull further down here rather than up here. Pull further down, and that will help straighten it out. Also, just be cool with however it ends up. It's gonna look so good. If it's a little rounded, that's okay. So as I clip, again, I'm clipping further down than you think you would need to. There we go. So I'm gonna do the same thing on the other side. Just make sure if you have folded your vinyl into one direction on the bottom seam, just keep it in that direction. Don't twist it. So just pulling it. Just trying to get that itty bitty box corner as straight as possible. There we go. And then once again, I clip further down. Just like that. And by clipping further down, that allows me to leave those clips here while I sew it, which helps keep it straight. I'm not trying to struggle with it at the machine. So I'm gonna do the same thing on the lining, and the lining is a little funny because it's a tiny box, but that's okay. Once again, I'm just going in opposite directions with the seam. I am not as worried about the lining being really straight or perfect because it's the lining. So now when we go to the machine, I'm gonna sew along the exterior boxed, these little tiny box corners at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. For the lining, I'm gonna sew along them at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And increasing that seam allowance just allows the lining to tuck in a little bit more and it won't be baggy on the inside of the bag. Once you have those boxed edges done, you can remove any extra clips. You might have noticed I went over twice again on the vinyl side just because vinyl is vinyl. I am going to trim the lining boxed edges a little bit. And that's it. I'm not going to trim the lining sides. You can if you'd like. So now we just want to flip this all out through that hole in the lining. So be gentle. You're going to be putting a lot of pressure on your zipper right now. So if you start getting frustrated and you take out too much of your aggression on that zipper, it can rip. We don't want to do that. All right, once you have it pushed out, once you pull your lining out and then push your hand into that lining, work on poking out the boxed bottoms nice and gentle. There we go. And then for the top where we have the zipper tab, I like to take my hand, I don't put it inside the lining like that. I just put it underneath the zipper and take my finger and just kind of gently pop it up. There you go. See? And that will help you get those zipper tabs up. Looking real nice. Look at that. That looks beautiful, doesn't it? Oh my gosh, this bag is so cute. It's so cute. All right, so I'm just going to put the lining in because I want to see what it looks like. I'm impatient. Oh, look how stinking cute that is. I need to heat up this top vinyl a little bit to get those wrinkles out. But this is such a cute little bag, isn't it? Such a good Sojo booster. So let's go ahead and finish up the lining. So poke the corners out with the lining right side out. And then all you have to do is stick your fingers into the sides and just pull the edge, especially on the smaller one here. It's pretty easy. You don't have to measure exactly how much it's folded in. Just make sure those raw edges are tucked in. And then, because I've been having such a fun time with these little tags, I'm going to pop this in before I sew it, and I just stick it in between the opening folds so that you can see it. There we go. So now we're just going to top stitch along this edge at an 1/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so let's tuck this back in. It's so cute. Oh, that's so cute. So I am going to show you how I get those creases out of that pink vinyl. I just have to heat it up pretty much. But I'm going to put this to the side while we work on the wristlet strap. So grab your wristlet strap and mark a line going down the center lengthwise on the back of it. And then you can grab some double-sided tape. Or again, if it's quilt cotton, just use an iron. But I'm going to use double-sided tape and add it along that midpoint mark. And then I'll just remove the paper from the tape. And then fold the long raw edges, wrong sides together to meet that midpoint line. And once again, if you're using quilt cotton, just iron this. Do this for both sides. And then what I do is as I'm folding it in, I fold it into a little hot dog bun so that all of the raw edges for the long side are hidden. We just have the raw edges on the short side still. All right, once you have that folded and prepped, grab your swivel hook and go ahead and add your swivel hook so that it goes a little bit down like that, kind of almost halfway down, just enough. And then you're gonna open up the short edges. And then keeping it straight, pull those short edges right sides together. So if you have tape, you might have to untape it here. There we go. And again, just keep it as straight as you can. And then pull those short edges right sides together and clip along those short edges. And I'm going to have to pull some of my tape out of the way so it doesn't get me all confused at my sewing machine. Okay, now let's sew along the short edge at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Again, keep that tape out of the way if you used it. Once those short edges are sewn, go ahead and press the seam open with your fingers. and then just refold those long edges back to meet the midpoint line. So I just do the seam first, fold it back. You can kind of tug on it, and everything should just naturally refold. Even if you didn't iron it, even if you're using waterproof canvas or maybe even a cork, it should also refold back the way you had it originally. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch along both folded edges, the single fold and the double fold, at 1/8 of an inch seam allowance. As you're going, you just have to move the swivel hook out of your way. So you should easily be able to do that. There we go, it's all sewn. So for the very last bit of my wristlet strap, you don't have to use a rivet for this. You can just use the sewing machine, but I like to add a rivet here. What I do is I find that connector. So you see it's all nice and loosey and bendy except for where we connected it. That's more firm and it's gonna stay flat. So pull your swivel hook right to where that corner of that connector is and then pull it down. And then I'm gonna mark a dot. So I have my seam here between the ends of my wristlet strap, and I'm gonna mark a dot about 1/4 of an inch below it because that's where I wanna put my rivet, but I don't want my rivet to go through that seam. I'm just gonna pull out my press that has the hole punch die on it, and I'm gonna punch out that hole, being very careful to not cut any stitches, including the top stitches. And then I can grab my rivet and just pop it through that hole. And then I'm gonna take my rivet press and just press the rivet down. And you can see by doing that, it just gives it a really cute professional finish, and it's so much easier than sewing a little rectangle or anything like that. Okay, so now let's talk about getting those wrinkles out of that vinyl. So some of you have suggested just heating up your ironing space, your ironing pad like I have, or your board. Just heat it up with the iron, lift it up, and then just kind of rub your vinyl on it. And that way you're transferring the heat to the vinyl, which is going to help. Another option is you can cover your vinyl with some quilt cotton, and I stick my hand inside and ever so carefully you can just kind of iron over your vinyl, and I'm not letting the iron go past the zipper so I don't have to worry about it burning me. And you can see by doing that, it's going to help you get out your wrinkles, and this is kind of my preferred method. I'm very, very gentle with my iron, so if your bag is all vinyl like mine, just make sure you cover up everything. So there's one side that's looking a lot better. So I'm gonna do the same thing on the back. All right, and there we go. Now I've got the wrinkles out and it is looking so cute. Alrighty, here we go. How cute is this little pouch? I love it so much. So I'm gonna add my little wristlet strap onto here. Oh, how sweet is that? So this is a pretty small box bottom. If you wanted, you could definitely increase the size of the box bottom by just increasing the size of that square that we cut. But look how cute these are. So here's the small and here is the medium. This is the difference in sizes. So I'm really excited to make the large. Like I said, when we make the large, I'm interested in using Decoville Light with that and quilt cotton, and then also making it a crossbody strap. This bag is so much fun. So if you are in a sewing rut, you know what I mean? It's just been cold for a long time. It might be darker more where you are. And it's just like, you know, I want to sew something, but I also just don't really want to do anything. This is a great project for that. It's a quick sew. It's not going to require a lot of time or a lot of stuff, but it's going to be really, really enjoyable and you're going to love it. And then you might get your Sojo back and you're going to go make that big backpack. So I hope you love making these little pouches as much as I do. Thank you so much to Kandou Patterns for allowing me to use your patterns in my tutorials. We all know how much I love Kandou Patterns over here. I hope you're having a great day. Have a fantastic rest of your week. Get out there and make something. Bye, guys.